The glass tabletop shone like a mirror under Talia Brooks's cloth when the door hissed open and the executive team filed in, trailing cologne and cold air. She kept her rhythm steady, circles inside circles, a choreography she had learned from her father to make herself small, quick, unnoticed. Martin Crowe walked last, crisp suit, watch face catching the ceiling lights. In his hand, a thick packet stamped with red characters. He let it slap the conference table, and the sound rolled along the glass like a gavel. "Whoever can translate this accurately gets my daily salary, $29,000. His voice carried the relaxed cruelty of a man sure no one in the room could meet him. He nudged the janitor cart aside with the side of his Italian loafer. The mop bucket bumped the wall, water shivering to the rim. A few executives laughed before they caught themselves. Ethan Price did not bother to hide his amusement. He tapped his Harvard ring against his tumbler, a bright, deliberate clink. "We could feed it to Google and save the payroll," he said, and the room warmed with permission to laugh again. "Or hire some bargain site, see what falls out." Talia kept her gaze on the glass, but the packet might as well have been a flare. Her brain snagged on the red stamps, on the printed title, where familiar strokes formed the spine of words she had learned before she could reach the top shelf. She blinked away the reflection of white lights, and in that reflection saw her phone screen flash through the pocket of her uniform. She did not pull it out. She did not have to. She knew the message arriving by heart. Final notice. Court date confirmed. Balance due. Martin leaned on the head of the table. "Clock's ticking," he said, without looking at the woman polishing his furniture. "We reply within 72 hours, or we watch the contract walk to our competitors. Maybe the cleaning crew can have a go," another voice tossed into the air. "Do they teach Mandarin in janitorial school?" The line got a smaller laugh, but it landed. Talia slid her cloth a fraction farther, as if the glass could swallow her. In the doorway, a gray sleeve paused. Terrence Brooks, pushing a second cart, scanned his daughter's face the way a parent reads a storm front. He gave her the look he had given her 1,000 times, the quiet order that had kept them in paychecks and under radar. "Keep your head down. Collect the hours. Go home." He did not step in. He moved on with the weight of the mop wringer in his hand and grease in the fold of his knuckles from the night shift in the boiler room. Ethan flipped the first page and grinned in the way of men who are clever when no one needs saving. "Title looks like joint partnership," he said. He was wrong. The word was not partner. Talia recognized the character for exclusive. The edges of the printed strokes were feathered, cheap toner in a rush. In her pocket, behind the phone she would not check, the smooth barrel of an old ebony pen pressed against her palm. The inlaid gold characters on it were almost worn flat. Her father had given it to her the year she turned 13, saying it belonged to a scholar once. She had traced those characters like a prayer. The glass had a smear that would not give, a crescent where someone's ring had cut a line, and she focused on it until the laughter blurred into a woolly hum. The number hooked into her ribs and held. 29,000. On the kitchen table back home, the bills were stacked in a grim staircase. 6 weeks of rent arrears, the legal retainer for the eviction hearing, her mother's cardiology prescription with the red handwritten note from the pharmacist that read "Pay by Friday or we cannot refill." The stairs added to the same number that rode now on the air, as if the CEO had walked into her apartment and counted her debt with his own fingers. "Security protocols apply," Martin said. "No copying, no forwarding, no photos. I want eyes on this floor. If anyone thinks of taking a shortcut, think again." He chopped a hand through space, not at her, not at anyone in particular, as if swatting a fly. The executives gathered closer to the packet, phones face down, pens in hand. Talia drifted to the credenza and straightened water bottles by label, aligned napkins by corners. That was the choreography. Face down, hands steady. Inhale when they speak. Exhale when no one is looking. She had learned the weight of being unseen and how to use it like a shield. Her phone vibrated a second time. She thumbed it open under the apron of her uniform. The landlord's office had sent a photo of a taped notice along their doorframe, the peel of torn paper visible at the corner where the last one had been removed. The caption was a single line. Locks change Monday morning. She closed the screen and felt the empty shape of her lungs. Monday was 74 hours away. Maybe we break it up and farm it out, Ethan offered. First pass by software, we clean it up in context. Or, Martin said softly, the smile not touching his eyes, one of you proves you are worth what you put on your resume. His gaze drifted, not at her, past her. She could have walked across the table, and he would not have flinched. The door opened again, and someone from facilities stepped halfway in with a rolling ladder. Talia slid away to let him pass, and the movement brought her within arm's length of the packet. The paper smelled faintly of toner and the spicy tang of a different office. Her eyes flicked down. A header, a numbered clause, a technical term for thermal behavior. She had translated a paper that used that same term last fall. Anonymous copy. Paid through an online handle she kept separate from everything else. She could do this. She could do this in her sleep. The thought was a flame that could burn everything down. If she spoke, she risked her job, their healthcare, the thin protection of being the person everyone forgot until trash bins overflowed. If she stayed silent, the window sealed shut and the fight moved to court and the hospital's billing desk. Terrence's cart clinked somewhere down the hall. Talia remembered his voice when he could still sing along to the radio in the car, when he used to point at street signs in Spanish and Mandarin and English, making her repeat them until her tongue felt like 3 tongues. He had once piloted machines that built the very components the packet described. Now he oiled hinges and kept his head low because men like Martin crowed about vision while cutting 100 small corners into other people's lives. "Tick-tock," someone mimicked under his breath, and the room chuckled again. Ethan's ring tapped once more. The sound was bright and thin, like the platter of a cheap platter spinning too fast. Talia lifted a pitcher to refill glasses that were already full, the accepted excuse to circle the table. She let her eyes skim a margin where someone had already scribbled the wrong gloss. She could feel the translation unspooling in her mind, clause to clause, how the tone hedged in one paragraph and hardened in the next, how a single character changed the legal center of gravity. Her hands did not shake, but her senses sharpened until she could hear the compressor of the refrigerator in the credenza cycle on, feel the draft from the ceiling vent slide across the sweat on her wrists. The number returned. 29,000. It was not generosity. It was theater. It was a coin tossed to prove that no one here could catch. It was exactly the number her mother's cardiologist had circled on a payment plan that had felt like a sentence. Martin closed the packet with a casual slap and looked at his team as if he were looking in a mirror. "You have until Friday," he said. "No mistakes." No one looked at the woman with the pitcher. That was the trick the world never tired of performing. Her phone thrummed one more time, and this time it was a name from the hospital, a nurse saying the word observation and then the word overnight, and then a number. Talia stared at her reflection in the table, the upside-down oval of her face wobbling as if the surface had become water. She felt for the ebony pen and closed her fingers around it until the engraved gold bit into her skin. The glass was spotless. The room smelled of money and lemon cleaner. The document lay 2 steps from her hand. She had already translated the title. She had already mapped the skeleton of the thing in her head. The only question left was whether she would give them the bridge they had asked for, and if she did, whether it would carry her family out of danger or carry the people she loved to the edge. If this opening struck a nerve, stay with us. Tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Stories like this are why voices from the margins refuse to stay quiet. When Talia was 8, her teachers whispered the word prodigy while she filled the blackboard with phrases no one had taught her. She could switch between English, Spanish, and Mandarin without pausing. Her accent crisp, her tones flawless. Other children stumbled over multiplication tables while she translated her classmates' birthday cards into 3 languages before recess ended. The gift wasn't random. At home, words were currency, and her father Terrence Brooks had been their banker. Terrence wasn't always the man pushing a mop through marble hallways. Years earlier, he had led thermal systems on Project Raphael, GX700, a Crow-Hang Tech joint venture. That cross-border team put his name on design notes Lin Huang's engineers still cited. Years earlier, he had worn a badge with his name engraved and walked the engineering floor of Crow Enterprises with pride. He specialized in thermal systems, his hands guiding machines that would one day anchor the company's billion-dollar processor line. He believed his knowledge could buy his daughter the kind of future no one could take away. When he came home at night, still in his coveralls, he placed technical manuals beside children's storybooks and made Talia read both out loud until she could decode them without stumbling. Dolores, her mother, leaned in the doorway, smiling, her Puerto Rican lilt rising when she teased, "You're raising a walking dictionary, Terrence." At 10, Talia became the bridge of her family. Her grandparents spoke Mandarin, her cousins Spanish, and every holiday meal was a cacophony until Talia translated, weaving the voices together like braids. The adults watched her with pride, not fully seeing the weight she carried. They called her gift a blessing. Terrence called it survival. On her 13th birthday, he gave her a long, narrow box wrapped in the Sunday comics. Inside lay an ebony pen with gold characters carved into the barrel. The metal was cool, heavy, alive in her palm. "This belonged to a scholar," he told her, voice rough from factory dust. "Now it belongs to another." The smell of sandalwood lingered from the small wooden case he had carved himself. She promised she would carry it everywhere. And she did. But promises couldn't stop what came next. 3 months later, Crow Enterprises announced a restructuring. Dozens of names disappeared from the roster, including Terrence's. 17 years of expertise reduced to a severance package that barely covered 2 months' rent. He came home that night with silence clinging to him like soot. Dolores found him sitting at the table staring at the termination letter. When she touched his shoulder, he whispered, "They said proprietary knowledge. They said I know too much." Bills multiplied like mold. Without health insurance, his cough became diagnosis, chronic occupational lung disease. He worked nights between treatments, pausing on stairwells to catch his breath. By the time the nebulizer hummed in their living room, Talia had learned another language entirely, the vocabulary of loss. Dolores picked up shifts cleaning offices, her engineering degree from San Juan reduced to a line ignored on applications. She collapsed one afternoon scrubbing baseboards, chest tightening, and the doctor called it the first warning shot of heart disease. From then on, her prescriptions were written in red ink. Urgent, expensive, endless. At 17, Talia dropped out of school to hold the pieces together. Her scholarship application sat unsent in a drawer while she put on the same gray uniform her mother wore. Every night, she polished conference tables inside the same company that had discarded her father, listening to executives discuss acquisitions and dividends while the smell of lemon cleaner clung to her hair. No one remembered Terrence Brooks had once built the machines they now boasted about. No one remembered a janitor's daughter could understand every word they said. She carried the ebony pen in her pocket through it all. Sometimes she traced the carved gold characters with her thumb, pressing until the grooves marked her skin, a secret reminder that she had been born with more than bleach and rags in her hands. But the world didn't care. To them, she was invisible, her lineage erased, her father's name a ghost they had chosen to forget. And yet the cruel symmetry remained. The same company that had ended Terrence's career now dangled the single chance that might save her mother's life. Crow Enterprises had buried her family once. Now it held the shovel again. By the time the sun rose, Talia Brooks had already been awake for 19 hours. Her schedule was stitched together like a survival manual. 4 p.m. to midnight, she scrubbed offices at Crow Enterprises, invisible in her gray uniform, while white-collar voices echoed above her head. From 1 a.m. until dawn, she sat at her kitchen table, translating academic papers under the anonymous username Bridge Soul. At 8, she logged back in to catch new clients in Europe, desperate for work before her body gave out. 3 hours of sleep came in snatches on the couch beside her mother's medical monitor. Then she started again. The numbers ran her life. $14 an hour for cleaning. $22 if the translation gigs came through. $453 a month for Dolores's medications. $600 for rent, long past due. $170 for utilities. $38 left over for groceries if nothing broke and no one got sick. She had notebooks where every column was marked with red slashes, debts against hope. The total circled at the bottom was always the same, the hole she could not fill. At 74 hours, the courthouse would stamp the eviction, and the locks would change. At 72 hours, Crow wanted a response to the Mandarin contract, or he would sell their future to competitors. 2 clocks ticked, one in her kitchen, one in the conference room she had just polished. Both pointed at her. Her father still pushed his mop down those hallways, back bent, joints swollen from years of concrete floors and machine oil. Terrence Brooks, once an engineer who could read schematics better than he read his own paycheck, was now just the man who smelled of ammonia. Younger managers barely nodded when he passed. Some didn't move their feet when his cart bumped the edge of their chairs. He kept his eyes down, jaw locked, telling Tahlia every shift, "Keep quiet, keep paid." The words tasted like rust to her. On Friday afternoon, she moved silently along the glass wall of the executive floor, dusting frames already spotless. Inside the boardroom, Martin Crow leaned back in his leather chair, his voice booming. "Closed on a place in Aspen last week, $12 million, worth every dime for the view." The table roared with approval. Ethan Price clinked his ring against a glass, grinning. Talia paused at the corner, cloth frozen in her hand. 12 million. She pulled the numbers through her mind automatically. That one vacation house equaled the cost of her mother's next surgery 200 times over. One day's interest on that mortgage could keep their family housed for a year. The sum felt like a blow. She pressed her rag harder into the glass until her knuckles whitened. Her phone buzzed again. She checked under the table edge, a new message from the landlord's office. "Balance must be paid by Monday morning or locks will be changed." Attached was a photo of their door, with the notice taped crookedly above the knob. Her heart kicked against her ribs. Monday morning meant 74 hours, the same deadline Martin Crow had just slapped on the table like a dare. She stepped back into the hallway, the smell of disinfectant clinging to her skin. Bridge Soul had 6 pending projects in her inbox, none worth more than $80. Even if she finished them all before dawn, it wouldn't scratch the debt. Her stomach clenched when she thought of Dolores sleeping on the couch back home, heart monitor blinking, medicine bottles lined like soldiers on the counter. 2 clocks, 2 verdicts. 72 hours to prove her worth to a man who didn't know her name. 74 to convince a judge not to throw her family into the street. She felt the weight of the ebony pen in her pocket, heavy as a hammer, light as a promise. Every character she had ever learned was burning in her throat, begging to be spoken. But silence had been survival for 5 years, and breaking it might cost them everything. Martin Crow's laughter carried down the hall, talking about the heated driveway and imported stone countertops in his mountain getaway. Talia closed her eyes, the figure rising in her mind once more. $29,000. The same number Crow had thrown into the air as a joke was the exact amount she needed to slam the brakes on both ticking clocks, and in that moment, polishing brass that already gleamed, she knew the decision would come faster than either deadline. The building after midnight had a different heartbeat. The fluorescent lights hummed low, the echo of heels and chatter replaced by the drone of air vents. Tahlia wheeled her cart down the polished corridor, uniform pressed, badge clipped to her shirt. To anyone watching the cameras, she was another janitor pulling weekend overtime. That was her cover, and it fit too well. The security guard at the desk barely glanced up when she signed the log. He had seen her 100 times, dragging trash bags heavier than she was. Tonight, he nodded, yawned, and said, "Still working, Brooks? Medicine's not cheap, huh?" She forced a smile, leaned into the accent she used when she needed to be invisible, and rolled past. He waved her through without another question. Her hands trembled only once when the elevator doors slid open on the executive floor. The air smelled sharper here, like leather polish and power. Conference chairs stood neatly around the long glass table, a graveyard of half-empty water bottles and scattered notes. Across the whiteboard, scrawled translations hung like graffiti, wrong characters, butchered terms, entire phrases twisted into nonsense. Her eyes scanned one line and her breath caught. They had translated the title as partnership agreement. It wasn't partnership at all. The first character spelled exclusive. She set her card in the corner, pulled her ebony pen from her pocket, and uncapped it with a soft click. The gold characters glinted under the recessed lights. Her father's voice echoed in her head. Words build bridges. She stepped closer to the board, reading the technical clause about processor manufacturing tolerances. They had scribbled flexible production rates. She almost laughed. The true phrase described a heat threshold so specific that one misreading could void the entire contract. If Crow's team signed on that mistake, Hang Tech could walk away with $1 billion advantage, and Crow would never know until it was too late. Tahalia reached up, erased the line with her sleeve, and wrote in clean, steady strokes. She didn't give them everything, just enough to point them in the right direction. 3 sections corrected, 3 lifelines thrown into the storm. She signed the bottom corner in small, deliberate letters. Night Owl. Bridge Soul was her anonymous handle online. Night Owl was the mark she left in buildings that never learned her name. The name had come to her in the silence of her kitchen table, when the world slept and she translated for strangers online. She left it there, black against the whiteboard, daring them to notice. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. She ignored it. If it was another demand for payment, she already knew what it would say. What mattered now was the effect. She stood back, studied her work, and exhaled. The pen was warm in her hand, heavy with risk. She recapped it and slid it back into her pocket. As she turned, a sudden creak in the hallway froze her blood. Footsteps. She grabbed her spray bottle, spritzed the glass, and wiped in frantic circles just as the guard rounded the corner. "Still at it?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "Overtime," she said, keeping her tone light, the accent thick. "Need money for mama medicine." He nodded without suspicion, leaning on the doorframe. "Don't work yourself sick." He moved on, his boots fading into silence. When he was gone, she pressed her forehead against the cool glass for one heartbeat. If the executives understood her corrections, they would see their error. If they ignored them, the deal could crumble in flames. Either way, the name Night Owl was in the room now, hovering like a ghost. She packed her cart, rolled it back toward the elevator, and kept her head down. Behind her, the whiteboard glowed under the recessed lights, her corrections standing out like cracks of truth through a wall of lies. One clause alone had revealed the scale of the danger. This wasn't just sloppy translation. This was the edge of $1.5 billion contract that could vanish if a single character remained wrong. As the elevator doors closed, she tightened her grip on the cart handle. For 5 years she had lived as a shadow in these halls. Tonight she had left a mark no one could erase. And when the executives walked in tomorrow, they would discover that someone in their building understood more than they dared imagine. The morning sun lit the executive floor with a cold gleam, as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. Talia rolled her cart along the hallway, her eyes lowered but sharp, waiting for the moment when someone would notice the whiteboard. Her chest was tight with a dangerous hope. She had left just enough. 3 corrections, precise strokes, the signature of Night Owl curling at the bottom. By the time the first wave of executives spilled in, she was dusting picture frames, close enough to listen. Ethan Price was the first to pause at the board. His tailored suit was crisp, his Harvard ring flashing as he leaned closer. His lips moved as he read the corrected lines. She saw his expression flicker, the quick narrowing of eyes, the calculation. Then, casually, he reached for the eraser. Her breath caught. With 3 clean swipes, Night Owl vanished. In its place, he uncapped his pen, retraced the words exactly as she had written them, and underlined them with a flourish. "Well," Ethan announced as Martin Crow entered, "I pulled an all-nighter. Couldn't let us embarrass ourselves on a deal this size." His tone carried the perfect mix of modesty and pride. "Took another look at the translation and realized we'd been misreading critical sections." Crow arched an eyebrow, stepping closer. "Show me." Ethan pointed to the title. "The term isn't partnership, it's exclusive manufacturing rights. If we'd signed with the old draft, Hang Tech would have walked us into a trap worth billions." His words mirrored exactly what Talia had written, but the credit sat neatly in his mouth. Crow's face shifted from skepticism to approval. He clapped Ethan on the shoulder, a heavy hand of recognition. "That's initiative. That's why I keep you around. The rest of you should take notes." Laughter and murmurs of agreement filled the room. Talia stood in the doorway with her rag, invisible again, watching her work become the ladder that lifted someone else higher. Her jaw tightened, but she kept her head bowed, circling the cloth over a spotless frame. "Effective immediately," Crow continued. "Price, you'll lead the translation team. Full authority. Coordinate everyone. We don't have time for mistakes." "Yes, sir," Ethan replied smoothly, already straightening his tie like it was a crown. He caught his reflection in the glass wall and smiled, then glanced past it. Straight at Talia. The brief lock of his eyes carried a silent message. "I know you heard and Shindong." "I don't care." She dropped her gaze, pretending to struggle with a smudge that wasn't there. Inside her chest, something burned hotter than humiliation. She had thought anonymity might protect her, let her test the waters, but now her gift had been stolen in plain sight, paraded as someone else's triumph. The name Night Owl had lasted less than 12 hours before being buried. The executives shuffled out, their voices buzzing about Ethan's brilliance, about how lucky they were to have him. Behind them, the boardroom smelled faintly of dry erase ink and betrayal. Talia wiped the door handle last, her hand steady even as her mind screamed. 60 hours remained until the locks changed on her apartment. 60 hours until Hang Tech's deadline. And now Ethan Price stood in the spotlight, armed with her words, while she remained in the shadows with nothing but the weight of her father's pen pressing against her side. That night the apartment was too quiet, broken only by the faint wheeze of her mother's breathing machine. Dolores shifted on the couch bed, a small moan escaping her lips as if even in sleep her body fought for air. Talia sat at the kitchen table, papers spread across the wood in a chaotic fan. She had photographed sections of the Mandarin proposal during her shift, copied onto scraps and napkins hidden in her apron. Now she lined them up under the dim bulb, her ebony pen balanced between her fingers like a weapon. The first clauses were technical, engineering tolerances, manufacturing deadlines. She moved quickly, her mind slipping into rhythm. Characters became sentences. Sentences became meanings. She noted the discrepancies Ethan's false translation would never catch, but halfway down a page, her eyes snagged on a phrase that froze her pulse. Workforce optimization requirements. It looked harmless at first, a vague corporate term. She translated carefully, character by character, and the full meaning emerged like poison. Crow Enterprises would be required to reduce no fewer than 350 positions within 60 days of contract execution. Her pen clattered onto the table. 350 jobs. She whispered the number aloud, as if testing its weight in the room. That wasn't just a statistic. She knew the face, the janitors on her floor, the cafeteria workers, the warehouse crews, the very people who nodded at her father every night when they clocked out. Among them was her neighbor Mrs. Alvarez, who had finally found stability at the plant after years of bouncing between minimum-wage jobs. Her son played soccer with the kids Talia sometimes translated for. If this contract was signed as written, they would all be gone. Her stomach knotted. The irony stabbed deep. The very clause that could guarantee her mother's medicine and save their apartment would simultaneously destroy the livelihoods of families just like hers, families who looked like hers. She pressed her palms flat against the table, trying to steady herself. This wasn't just a business deal. It was a trap baited with survival. She glanced toward the couch. Dolores stirred, coughing softly. The medicine bottles lined on the counter gleamed under the weak light, a silent reminder of the cost of every day. If she refused this chance, eviction would come. Her mother's prescriptions would run dry. They would be the ones displaced. Another family erased by the city's appetite. But if she delivered the translation and stayed silent, the blow would fall on hundreds of others. Talia picked up the pen again, her father's pen, the grooves in the gold engraving pressing against her skin. His voice seemed to rise out of memory. Words build bridges between worlds. She wondered what he would say now, staring at a clause that turned words into weapons. Could a bridge carry one family forward if it meant hundreds more fell into the river? The clock on the stove ticked toward 2 a.m. 61 hours until the eviction hearing. 72 until Crow's deadline. 2 clocks, 2 verdicts, and now a third burden. 350 families tethered to her decision. She closed her eyes, drew a breath so deep it hurt, and whispered to the empty kitchen. What do I save? Who do I save? The question hung in the stale air, heavier than the silence, heavier than the debt. For the first time, she realized the fight was not just about her mother, not just about herself. The company that had ruined her father's career now dangled a contract that demanded she either sacrifice her family or sacrifice her community. Either choice cut into her, leaving no path without blood. And she understood, with a chill that made her hands shake, that she could no longer think of survival as something private. Her fate and theirs were bound together now, written in the same characters, on the same page she had just translated. The announcement came without warning. At the morning briefing, Martin Crow's voice sliced through the air like a blade. "We've had a breach," he said, slapping a remote that brought grainy footage onto the wall screen. The executives leaned forward, murmuring. The image showed a shadow moving across the executive conference room after hours. The face was obscured, but the outline was unmistakably small, shoulders narrow, head bowed. Someone unauthorized touched sensitive documents. Until we know who, every staff member with night access is under review. Talia's breath hitched as she pushed her cart past the doorway. On the screen, the figure erased a line on the whiteboard and wrote something new. Even blurred, she recognized her own hand in the confident stroke. She kept her eyes on the floor, cloth twisting in her fingers. "Start with the janitorial team," Crow ordered. "They're the only ones in the building at those hours." The words rippled through the staff like shockwaves. By noon, security had set up interviews in a side office, pulling cleaners one by one under harsh fluorescent light. When her turn came, Talia walked in with her head low, apron still damp from her shift. The guard across the table tapped a pen against a clipboard. "Name?" "Talia Brooks." She pitched her voice flat, kept her syllables slow, the way she had learned to sound less fluent. "You understand English?" She widened her eyes slightly, let her accent thicken. "A little. Cleaning only. I don't understand big words." The guard frowned, flipping through notes. "Were you on the executive floor Saturday night?" "Clean only," she repeated, gesturing to her rag. "Empty trash. No papers." He sighed, leaned back. The stereotype was working. The same prejudice that made them overlook her for years now shielding her. After a few more questions, she pretended not to comprehend, shaking her head, apologizing softly. At last, the guard waved her off. "Go. Next." Relief washed through her as she left the office, but it evaporated when she saw Ethan Price waiting in the hall. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, Harvard ring tapping against the metal edge of a filing cabinet. His eyes tracked her with unsettling focus. "Funny thing," he said, voice low so the guards wouldn't hear. "You seem to understand me perfectly when I tell you to mop faster." She forced a shrug, lowered her gaze. "Simple words. Meeting talk. Too hard." He tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle. A thin smile crept across his mouth. "We'll see." That night, when she opened her locker in the custodial room, her stomach dropped. The contents were jumbled, her neatly folded rags shoved aside, and one thing was missing: the ebony pen, her father's gift, her talisman. She searched frantically, checking under the bench, behind the door, even inside her shoes. Gone. She sank onto the bench, heart pounding. Without the pen, she felt exposed, unarmed. Every character she wrote with it was a connection to her father, to the scholar he had believed she could become. Now it was in someone else's hands. As she left the room, Ethan passed her in the hallway, spinning something slender between his fingers. The gleam of gold engraving caught the light. He didn't stop, didn't hand it back. He only glanced at her and said, "Nice pen. Must mean something to you." Then he walked on, leaving her frozen, every muscle tight. The cameras had marked her shadow. The guards had her name on their list. And now Ethan had her father's pen. Every wall was closing in, and the clock was still ticking. Ethan waited until the corridor was empty before cornering her. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence, the flicker of its light casting hard shadows on the tile. He twirled the ebony pen between his fingers with lazy precision, the carved gold glinting as if mocking her. "Funny thing," he said softly, stepping close enough that she caught the scent of his cologne, sharp and expensive. "This pen doesn't exactly look like standard janitorial equipment. Security calls that suspicious material." He let the words hang, tapping the pen against his palm. "I should probably file a full report." Talia's chest tightened. She reached for it instinctively, but he pulled it back with a smirk. "Relax. I'm not going to turn it in. Yet. Depends on you." His eyes narrowed, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "See, I've been doing some checking. Your mother's name came up. Dolores Brooks. Funny thing about paperwork. Looks like the hospital's charity care file and your payroll records don't match. I can flag insurance fraud and non-payment right now. Your mother's treatment gets cut off immediately." The floor seemed to tilt under Talia's feet. He had found her weak point, the truth they had hidden under years of silence. She forced herself to breathe, to keep her face neutral even as panic scraped at her throat. "You keep pretending you don't understand English, keep mopping floors, and maybe your secret stays safe," Ethan continued, his Harvard ring tapping deliberately against the pen. "But if you so much as breathe wrong in front of Crow, if you try to outshine me, I make a phone call, and your mother's gone." Her nails dug into her palms until they stung. She wanted to scream, to snatch the pen from his hand and carve the truth across the walls, but one image stopped her. Dolores in a hospital gown, wheeled into a detention center instead of a cardiac ward. The cruelty of it pressed down on her chest like a weight. Ethan smiled wider, sensing victory. "So here's the deal. You keep quiet, I keep the pen, and you remember who's in charge." He slipped it into his jacket pocket as if it belonged there, then straightened his tie and walked away, leaving her trembling against the wall. When she returned to the custodial room, a white envelope waited in her locker. The HR logo bled across the top. Her hands shook as she tore it open, a formal warning. "Possession of unauthorized personal items during work hours. Further violations may result in termination." The words blurred as tears pricked her eyes. Ethan hadn't just stolen her father's gift. He had planted the seed for her dismissal. She folded the letter back into the envelope and pressed it to her chest, trying to steady her breath. The countdown was still running, but now it wasn't just eviction and debt. One wrong step and she could lose her mother forever. The trap was closing, and Ethan Price held the key. The boardroom was thick with tension, the kind that made every cough sound like a crack of thunder. Executives shuffled papers. Martin Crow sat at the head with a predator's calm, and Ethan Price clicked through slides on the massive screen. His voice carried false confidence as he skimmed over technical clauses in Mandarin. "This section," Ethan declared, pointing at a line, "outlines staff reallocation requirements. Essentially, we'll shift workers between divisions to accelerate production." Talia froze where she stood by the wall, refilling glasses that didn't need refilling. The words were wrong, painfully wrong. The phrase wasn't about reallocation at all. It was about semiconductor thermal management, the kind of mistake that could sabotage an entire production line. She felt her pulse hammering in her ears. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, frail in a hospital bed. Her father's voice followed. "Words build bridges." Her hand tightened around the pitcher until her knuckles whitened. The silence stretched, waiting for someone to nod, to confirm Ethan's lie. Then the words slipped out of her mouth, quiet but firm. "That's not what it means." The room stilled. Dozens of eyes turned. Martin Crow's gaze cut across the table, pinning her like a spotlight. Ethan stiffened. "What did you say?" Talia set the pitcher down with care, straightened her shoulders, and repeated louder, "That's not what it means. The term is liudong moxing. It refers to a fluid thermal modeling system, not workforce reallocation." The room erupted in murmurs. Crow leaned forward, intrigued. "You speak Mandarin?" "Mandarin, Spanish, and English," she answered, voice steady now. "I also read Japanese and Korean. My father trained me since childhood." She met Crow's stare head-on. "You've been misled." Ethan barked a laugh, forced and brittle. "She's just a cleaner." "Don't listen to her. My father was Terrence Brooks." Talia cut him off. The name landed heavy. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Crow's eyes narrowed, recognition flickering. "He built part of your Asian market division before your restructuring threw him out. He taught me the terminology you're twisting right now." Gasps rolled around the table. The invisible janitor's daughter had just claimed a seat in their world, and she wasn't backing down. Ethan's face flushed crimson. "She's lying. She probably stole notes." "I'm the one who left the corrections," Talia said, her chin lifting. "Night owl, that was me. And if you check the clauses again, you'll see I'm the only one who has translated them accurately." Crow sat back, calculating. The room's balance had shifted. "If that's true," he said slowly, "then you've been holding out." Talia stepped closer to the table, her heart pounding, but her voice clear. "I'll give you the full translation. But I want it in writing, my employment protected, my mother's immigration status off the record, and I want my pen back." Crow didn't blink. "Security." One guard stepped forward. Ethan froze, then pulled the ebony pen from his jacket and set it on the table. Crow slid it toward Talia. "Yours." All heads turned to Ethan. He paled, hand slipping instinctively toward his jacket pocket. The stolen pen. Crow's eyes sharpened, suspicion flaring. For the first time in years, Talia wasn't invisible. She stood in front of the men who had laughed at her, who had stolen from her, and laid her demands bare. The room was electric, waiting for Crow's move, waiting to see if the janitor's daughter had just dismantled the lie they'd built on. The small conference room they had assigned her smelled of stale coffee and printer ink. The clock on the wall ticked louder than her heartbeat. Talia sat hunched over her laptop, stacks of copied pages fanned out beside her, the ebony pen finally back in her possession. The board had grudgingly agreed to her terms, but that didn't mean trust. She had 18 hours to prove herself, and failure meant not just termination, but ruin. She worked like a machine, eyes scanning characters, fingers moving with surgical precision. Her notes grew in tight rows across legal pads, cross-references filling margins, her pen scribbling corrections between typed lines. Each clause peeled open another layer of the deal. It wasn't as simple as she first thought. Some sections were brutal, reductions in workforce, cost-cutting mandates. but others hinted at possibility. A section tucked near the end caught her eye. Retraining initiatives, language programs, skill certifications, partnerships with local colleges. She blinked at the page, exhausted but alert. If negotiated properly, this contract didn't have to be a guillotine. It could mean layoffs softened by pathways into new roles, families not just cut loose, but given a chance. The thought stirred something she hadn't felt in weeks, a thread of hope. For the first time, she could see a bridge that carried both her mother and her neighbors across. Her phone buzzed against the desk, shattering her focus. She nearly ignored it, then saw the hospital's number. Her stomach turned cold as she answered. A clipped voice on the other end delivered the blow. "We need a deposit of $2,500 by morning if your mother is to remain in care." The words punched through her like a hammer. Her pen slipped from her fingers, clattering across the table. 2,500. Another deadline, another noose. Rent, court, translation. Now a hospital bill she couldn't possibly cover. The numbers stacked, crushing her under their weight. She pressed the phone to her ear, forcing words past the knot in her throat. "Please, I'm working on it. I'll find a way." But the nurse's tone stayed professional, detached. "Without payment, we cannot continue treatment." The line clicked dead. Talia sat frozen, the conference room spinning around her. She picked up the pen, gripping it until the gold engraving bit into her skin. The hope she had glimpsed in the retraining clause flickered against the crushing new demand. Every clock was speeding up. Every second mattered. And as she forced herself back to the page, translating through a haze of panic, she knew she was racing not only against corporate deadlines, but against her mother's failing heart. The night dragged on, the conference room humming with the sound of her typing. Talia's eyes were bloodshot, her fingers cramped, but the translation was nearly complete. 80% done, the rest mapped in her notes. She could feel the finish line. A knock at the door startled her. Ethan Price stepped in, a paper cup in his hand and that trademark smile plastered across his face. "You look exhausted," he said smoothly, walking closer. "Figured you could use some coffee. We're all on the same team, right?" Talia kept her gaze on the screen, the glow reflecting in her tired eyes. "I don't need favors." "Come on," he coaxed, setting the cup on the desk, too close to her notes. "I know Crow's counting on you, but you shouldn't push yourself this hard." He leaned casually, but his hand twitched with intent. In one motion, he tipped the cup. Hot liquid splashed across the table, flooding the pages, seeping into the laptop's keyboard. "No!" Talia cried, shoving the cup aside and snatching her notes. But it was too late. The screen flickered, lines of code stuttering, then went black. A sharp pop sounded, followed by silence. She grabbed tissues, dabbing frantically, but the damage spread like ink in water. Her machine was dead. Months of practice files, hours of meticulous translation, all gone. Ethan feigned concern, tilting his head. "Damn, must have been an accident. These old laptops can't handle much. Good thing I thought ahead." He tapped the flash drive in his pocket, hidden from her view. "I moved your files to my secure drive earlier, just in case." Her stomach dropped. "You what?" "Relax," he said, his smile hardening into something sharper. "I'll take it from here. Crow doesn't care who types the words, as long as the deal closes. And when he asks who saved the contract, well..." He let the thought dangle, smug and poisonous. Talia's hands shook as she pressed the power button again and again, praying for life. Nothing. Her notes were stained, the ink bleeding into unreadable blurs. Panic clawed at her chest, but Ethan only watched, satisfied. "Don't take it personally," he whispered, leaning close enough that she could smell the bitter coffee on his breath. Some people were made to shine. Others were made to clean up after them. He straightened his tie, walked to the door, and left her in the wreckage. Talia sat frozen, her reflection ghostly in the dead screen. Every second counted, and now she had nothing. What she didn't know was that Ethan had already copied her progress, planning to deliver it as his own before dawn. The messages came like hammer blows, one after another. No room to breathe. First was the landlord. Her phone lit up with a photo of a locksmith van parked outside their building. The caption was merciless. "We're changing the locks tonight. No more extensions." Her stomach dropped. 74 hours had shrunk to 0. She barely had time to process before another call buzzed through. The hospital. A nurse's voice, urgent and clipped, filled her ear. "Your mother's in cardiac distress. We've stabilized her for now, but she needs further intervention immediately. Without payment, we can't keep her admitted." Talia's knees buckled. She pressed a hand against the wall to stay upright, vision blurring with tears. Dolores gasped for air somewhere across the city while the world was tearing away every option. Then came the final blow. She was summoned to HR. The office smelled of cold toner and disinfectant. A folder sat on the desk between her and the manager, its edges aligned too neatly. "Miss Brooks," the manager said, voice polite but deadly, "you've been flagged for unauthorized access to confidential documents. That violates our security protocols." He slid the folder closer. "This is a termination notice awaiting Mr. Crow's signature." The words tore through her like glass. She fought to breathe, fought to keep her face blank as the manager continued. "Until the document is signed, you remain employed. But I can't promise more than a few hours." His gaze flicked to the clock on the wall. "Crow will be here soon." Talia left the office on shaking legs, the hallway tilting beneath her. 3 blades had struck at once. Eviction, her mother's failing heart, and the company pulling the last thread of her disguise. Every clock was broken, every path blocked. She pressed the warning slip against her chest and staggered toward the stairwell, the weight of the ebony pen in her pocket feeling more like a gravestone than a gift. For the first time in years, she wondered if invisibility had been safer after all. The HR hallway blurred as Talia stumbled out, clutching the slip that marked her end. Her pulse thundered, her mind fractured by eviction, hospital bills, and the looming signature that would erase her name from the payroll. She pressed her back against the cold wall, sliding down until her knees hit the floor. The weight of failure pressed on her chest, suffocating. Her gaze fell to the tote bag she always carried, stuffed with cleaning rags and battered notebooks. One edge stuck out, a corner of worn leather, familiar as a heartbeat. She froze. Slowly, she pulled it free. Her father's old technical journal, the one Terrence Brooks had filled with cramped notes, diagrams, and equations during his years at Crow Enterprises. She had carried it as a talisman, never truly opening it since his death. Now her shaking hands flipped the pages. Lines of Mandarin mixed with schematics spilled across the paper, thermal stress charts, margin tolerances, and then stamped in her father's neat block letters, GX100. Her breath caught. It wasn't GX100, the series everyone at Crow still referenced. This was something more advanced, the prototype system he had whispered about once, a design hang-tech later absorbed into their patents. But here in her father's handwriting, were details hang-tech had never published. Proprietary methods, adjustments to the fluid thermal modeling system, corrections that only someone on the inside could have known. Talia's heart pounded as she traced the ink with her fingertip. Her father hadn't just left her a relic, he had left her a weapon. The hang proposal hinted at GX 700 but skipped entire sections, assuming Crow Enterprises already knew the foundation. They didn't. Ethan didn't. Crow himself didn't. But she did, through the legacy of Terrence Brooks. She gripped the notebook tight, fire flickering back into her lungs. For the first time in days, the weight of the countdown shifted. She wasn't powerless anymore. She had knowledge that no translation software, no corporate spy, no Harvard opportunist could replicate. This wasn't just about fixing errors. It was about proving mastery that reached beyond the deal itself. Her father's voice echoed from memory. "Knowledge is leverage, and leverage makes the world move." She wiped her face, stood, and tucked the notebook under her arm like a shield. The eviction notice, the HR warning, the hospital's demand, All of it still hung over her, but now she had something stronger than fear. She had the truth, written in her father's hand, and it was a truth even Hang Tech didn't expect her to wield. The janitor's daughter was no longer cornered. She was preparing to strike back. The boardroom lights glared white, bouncing off the glass table where the directors sat stiff and expectant. Martin Crow adjusted his tie, the predator smile gone, his jaw set in calculation. The wall screen blinked to life, and the face of Lin Huang, CEO of Hang Tech, appeared with his team arrayed behind him. A murmur rolled through the room as the connection stabilized. "Crow Enterprises," Huang began in Mandarin, his tone clipped, formal. "We will proceed, on one condition. Your representative must translate live." The words hit like a thunderclap. Eyes shifted across the table, landing on Ethan Price. He cleared his throat, flipping through his prepared notes, trying to hide the panic in his eyes. "Of course," he said in clumsy Mandarin, but he stumbled immediately, twisting tones into nonsense. Snickers rippled across the Hang delegation. Crow's face darkened. Before Ethan could recover, another voice rang out, clear and confident. "The phrase is not accelerated labor cycles. It means adaptive fluid modeling." Talia had stepped forward from the edge of the room, her father's notebook in her hand. Silence clamped down as every executive turned toward her. Lin Huang's eyes narrowed, then softened. He switched to Mandarin. "Who are you?" She lifted her chin. "Talia Brooks, daughter of Terrence Brooks, who built your GX700 prototypes before this company cast him aside." The Hang team exchanged glances, murmurs breaking out. One man leaned into frame, eyes widening. "Raphael team, Terrence's daughter," he said, clearly invoking the old project codename. "He told us about you." Ethan shot to his feet. "She's lying. She's just a janitor." The boardroom door opened and the head of security stepped in, holding a tablet. "We pulled the footage you requested, sir." The video played on the screen. Ethan standing over Talia's desk, coffee spilling deliberately across her laptop, his fingers swiping files onto his drive. Gasps erupted. Crow's expression turned to steel. "Mr. Price," Crow said softly, dangerously. "Explain this." Ethan stammered, his mask cracking. It was an accident." "Enough," Crow snapped. "Security, remove him." Guards closed in, dragging Ethan from the room as he shouted protests that no one believed. His voice faded down the hall, replaced by the pounding silence of humiliation. Lin Huang's gaze returned to Talia. "Your father once told me knowledge lives in bloodlines. We wrote clauses in this proposal as traps, deliberate ambiguities. We wanted to see if Crow Enterprises still had the Brooks legacy." He inclined his head slightly. "And it appears you do." A wave of realization swept the room. Hang Tech hadn't just been negotiating. They had been testing, probing for a mind like Terrence's. And Talia had passed where everyone else failed. Crow leaned back, forced to mask his fury with pragmatism. "Then she stays," he said, every word ground out. "On staff. Protected. Effective immediately." Talia stepped closer to the screen, her voice steady as she translated clause after clause, live and flawless. The Hang delegation nodded, impressed. The board leaned in, scribbling notes, eyes wide as she revealed terms even the written proposal had obscured. Every sentence she spoke built her father's bridge anew, spanning the chasm between humiliation and vindication. By the time the call ended, the air in the boardroom had shifted. Ethan Price was gone, disgraced. Crow sat silent, calculating the cost of underestimating the janitor's daughter. And Talia Brooks stood where no one had believed she belonged, notebook in hand. Her father's legacy alive in every word. The contract was signed with cameras rolling, every executive scrambling to reclaim dignity. Crow wrote the check with stiff fingers, $29,000. His daily salary slid across the table. But Lin Huang's team added their own surprise, a $55,000 bonus earmarked for cultural liaison services rendered by Ms. Brooks. $77,000 in total. Enough to stop the eviction, cover Dolores's hospital bills, and breathe for the first time in years. 2 days later, the locks on their apartment stayed unchanged. Dolores came home from the hospital with medication, therapy scheduled, her color slowly returning. For the first time since her father was laid off, Talia slept through the night without jolting awake to the sound of debt collectors in her dreams. 6 months passed. The skyline outside her window looked different from the corner office she now occupied, Director of Cultural Strategy at Crow Enterprises, a title no one could take from her, carved into the brass plate on her desk. She still carried her father's leather notebook, though now it rested in a glass case beside a polished photo of him in his engineering uniform. The ebony pen sat upright in a crystal stand, no longer hidden, its gold characters gleaming in daylight. Her first act as director had been to create the Hidden Genius program, a pipeline for custodians, cafeteria workers, warehouse clerks, employees overlooked like she once was. The program paid for certifications, language training, and direct paths into management. Within months, stories surfaced: a security guard with an engineering degree stepping into product development, a cafeteria worker leading a bilingual outreach team, an IT technician promoted to design. The board noticed the numbers. Retention up, market share up, profits higher than projections. Crow spun it into investor-friendly language, profit from diversity, as if the humanity of it were an afterthought. Talia knew better. She had lived the cost of invisibility. Now she was proof of the return on recognition. Not everyone landed on their feet. Ethan Price's name became a warning whispered in corporate circles. No firm would touch him after the footage went public. Last anyone heard, he was teaching business communications at a community college, lecturing rooms full of students he once would have dismissed as unworthy. Irony hung over his lectures like a shadow. Crow remained himself, calculating, driven by numbers, not justice. Yet even he had learned to stop underestimating the janitor's daughter. In the last shareholders' meeting, he called her an unexpected asset, corporate speak for admitting she had saved him from ruin. Talia had smiled at that, because she knew translation wasn't only about words on a page. It was about converting invisibility into power. On the morning she presented the company's new global expansion plan, she greeted the board in 3 languages: English for efficiency, Spanish for her mother, Mandarin for her father. The room leaned in, and when she clicked the first slide, showing a 32% market increase tied directly to her initiatives, silence rippled into applause. As she left the boardroom that day, employees from every level greeted her by name, some in Spanish, some in English, some in Mandarin. Bridges, living and breathing. She held her father's notebook in one hand, the ebony pen in the other, a daughter of a janitor now writing the company's future.